Hello, everyone, to the Advances in Research and Innovation stream of SNOMED CT 2023. My name is Victor Medina, and I'm a surgical terminologist at SNOMED International. I will be moderating today's session. All questions will be answered at the conclusion of the presentation. Only online attendees, please use the Q&A button to type your questions to the presenter. On-site attendees, please use the microphone provided in the room. I'm now pleased to introduce Eulàlia Farré-Maduell from Barcelona Supercomputing Center, who will be presenting, should we subclassify procedures before normalization? An experience with 1,000 case report corpus in Spanish. Eulàlia, please go ahead.
Good afternoon. My name is Eulàlia Farré. I work at the Barcelona Supercomputing Center, and today I will briefly talk about if we should subclassify procedures before normalization, in this case with pre-coordinated concepts in SNOMED CT. This work is based on our experience with a corpus of 1,000 clinical case reports published in Spanish. So briefly, our unit within the Barcelona Supercomputing Center is the Natural Language Processing for Biomedical Information Analysis. We are a multidisciplinary group. I'm the physician of the group. I'm a pediatrician, but we have experts in computer science, biology, computational linguistics, etc. So we organize international shared tasks when we devise a medical concept like procedures. So we organize this task so that people can maybe find better solutions than us to fine-tune machine learning models to capture these concepts from medical text. We work in Spanish, Catalan, and English mainly, but also we participate in European projects working with other languages such as Swedish and Dutch. So we process any biomedical document, social media, etc. But the stars of our group are processing electronic health records. We are currently working with national and European hospitals. So briefly, the contents of the talk, I will introduce what are procedures in health and its complexity. I will talk about this task that I was telling you about, which is the medical procedures name entity recognition task, MED-PROCNER, the subclassification that we undertook, and consideration about post-coordination, which we don't do yet, and the conclusions. So procedures in health, as you know, procedures are essentials to health since are the solutions that doctors, nurses, etc. Offer us as patients. But it's a very heterogeneous category. It's a bit like symptoms where you have lots of different things inside. For instance, we can have psychological therapies, we can have all the imaging, we can have medical exams performed by the doctor with their hands or the stethoscope only, medical tests, which are blood tests, electrocardiograms, we have administration of transfusion, we have very long and complex surgical procedures, etc. So within all this heterogeneity, we find simple concepts. Sometimes the medical record mentions an abdominal ultrasound, so we are very happy. We go to SNOMED, find the exact match, and that's it, work done. Fortunately, SNOMED also offers compound expressions which contain in themselves more than one procedure, like in this case, when the surgeon is freeing adhesions of the fallopian tube, she does so with an endoscope. So we have these codes that offer us the possibility of using just one code for the whole procedure. But in some other concepts, we don't find that. So we have to take a step back and think, well, which code can I assign to this mention, if at all? So the three examples in the complex mentions, the first is the easiest. We got a good approximation. It's the mention biopsy obtained with video thoracoscopy. We find a code with thoracoscopy with biopsy. So we only missed the video. We were quite happy, satisfied. However, in the next two examples, the solution was very lacking. We lost a lot of detail. In the first, we have bicoronal and left subcranial approach with excision, which is all part of the same procedure, more or less, but the code we put was quite too simple and unsatisfying. Much more so in the last example when it mentioned the name of the artery of the vein, and I just dared to put an anastomosis of blood vessel because I didn't know what quite to do. I have highlighted here the rotated posteriorly to reach. This is very descriptive language that I don't know if at all we can ever codify it. So this task that we undertook to train a medical system, to train systems to automatize the capture and codification of procedures in medical texts consisted of a corpus of 1,000 case reports written in Spanish and published of various medical and surgical specialties. We had urology, maxillofacial surgery, dentistry, we had oncology, cardiology, pediatrics, etc. It was very varied. We use the categories, procedure, medicinal product, regime, physical object, and others, because when we have complex categories, we find that we tend to use many categories within SNOMED CT, not just the one. You know, we are doing procedures, we use procedures. We use many more. We do that at gold standard level, so we manually annotate and manually normalize the whole thing. So, and in this case, with the 1,000 case reports, we ended up with over 14,000 procedures. So my colleague Luis Gasco has prepared an in-house tool called SiteLinker, which he's still developing, which helped a lot. So we had the mention, and then the tool provided us with approximated code, which was the one that we thought best. And we also said if the code was a perfect match, or it was like a parent code, or if we simply didn't find any code for that mention. We also signed if we were dealing with an abbreviation or an acronym, a composite mention, or if we needed to use the context. I have to say I use the context a lot to provide what I think better codes. Some of the challenges encountered during this whole process of normalizing this 14,000 mention was sometimes we didn't find a code, which sometimes it happens when you find a very rare procedure, but sometimes it wasn't quite common things, like for instance, in all the oncology cases when people are diagnosed, the medical text mentioned that the doctor does a study to check if the cancer has extended, if we have metastases. We didn't find a code for that, so we put no code. In other cases, we find things that look very much like synonyms. Like here, the example of tooth extraction, simple extraction of tooth, you wonder, you don't see any difference in the mention, any difference. Maybe you find the difference sometimes when you look at the parent of these concepts. But one worry that I have is automatic systems can distinguish, once they see the same mention, the same names, if automatic systems are able to go to the parent and distinguish which is the best. This is a worry we have. And most frustratingly for me of all is when I don't find a parent concept, which for me is a bit irritating. For instance, in this corpus, there were several cases of children that underwent osteosynthesis procedures to elongate their limbs. And I only find osteosynthesis in a very specific context of ultrasonic osteosynthesis. So I couldn't really put a code to this. So what subclassification we decided to do to improve this process of normalization? So very briefly, we decided that some mentions were simple. You had otoscopy or skull X-ray. You find a code, you assign, problem solved. The other are the composite mentions, lung X-ray and scan, which unfold into lung X-ray and lung scan, which are two simple mentions, in fact, also. If time consuming, but it's quite simple. The other were acronyms. When acronyms have 3 or more letters, are usually recognizable. When they have 2, you have to look at the concept. But in most cases, we ended up with a simple concept as well. It was not that difficult to normalize. And finally, we ended up with these long descriptions that were very difficult to normalize. And those were the ones that gave us most work. So out of these 14,000, we classified and we found that 80%, so the majority are simple, like sweat test, you find the code, fine, sorted. 7% were acronyms. In this case, ERCP is very recognizable. Others are not so, but once you had the context, we could get most of them. 6% were composite mentions. Again, in this example is quite easy, bone marrow aspiration and bone marrow biopsy. You find the 2 codes, no problem. And finally, we ended up with the really complex ones, which many times we thought were surgical descriptions of the surgical procedures. So we have here a very long description of the release of the splenic flexure of the colon, etc. I looked at that as a non-specialist. I thought, okay, I'll put operation and abdominal region, which I knew it was quite poor, but I didn't dare to go more in depth. So within the complex codes, we did another classification and see, okay, let's see what's inside here. And we find that 9% were diagnostic procedures, like here, frozen biopsy under general anesthesia, which many of them are also quite difficult. There were also a percentage of imaging, which we find with MRI, with all these windows, the contrast. We find also that dynamic imaging is quite complex. Sometimes if the ultrasound goes here, describes this and that, we find these things quite complex usually. There were others difficult to classify further, like in this case, bladder reeducation, for which we could find quite a good code. And finally, most of them were really surgical descriptions, the majority. Again, I saw this suture with bicryl, a sheet of stratis, dermal matrix, etc. You know, I took a step back. What are they talking about? A suture of the breast. I put that. I don't dare put anything else. It's not very satisfying. You know, you are not doing a very good job. But if you only take pre-coordinated mentions, I think you cannot do much more sometimes. So what about post-coordination? So already when annotating, we know that we have these long descriptive mentions that we are not very sure where to start, where to finish, if they are taking really about one procedure or 2. So already in the annotation phase, we know we could do better, perhaps. We also know that we are underusing all the features that SNOMED CT provides if we don't use post-coordination at all. We know that post-coordination is to provide more detail, to capture new meanings, new clinical meanings. We are not doing that. But again, before you post-coordinate, you need to have the tools. You need to know that you can process all these codes that you have chosen. And before doing that, the obvious questions, at least in procedures, that we thought was, firstly, we needed at least a linguistic in-depth analysis of these complex expressions. So how much is a procedure, how much is a material, how much is a tool, how much is anatomical parts. So we would need to do that first. We would need to recruit a specialist. So if we are doing maxillofacial surgery, we would need a maxillofacial surgeon. If we were dealing with dentistry, we would need a dentist. Because this is not anymore general medicine, they are talking many times of very specific things. And lastly, but most importantly, we would need to know that this could be used for something, not just doing it as an academic experiment, because really this is very time consuming. So the conclusions of our work briefly is that, yes, it's useful to classify procedures being this broad and heterogeneous category to accelerate normalization, because then you can get rid of 80% of the codes quite quickly because, with a tool that helps you normalize, you can go quite fast. It helps prevent fatigue when you normalize so many mentions and you are faced with these long descriptive things in the middle. You have to stop, you have to study, you have to look at the internet to see what's happening. Also, it helps you determine which mentions really need you need a specialist for, and you can put them apart. And also to recognize more easily which ones you will not be able to normalize with pre-coordinated concepts as such. So most of these complex mentions are surgical descriptions, and we have to think about the importance of this of normalizing surgical procedures. And if we need to do that, how we will go about this. It is crucial to define use cases with the people that would use all these codes, etc., to see if they would benefit from our post-coordination, etc. And then this is a question more so for people that have done it, and also for us as a group, should we really start considering that, not if we are going to post-coordinate, but when we start to really be able to translate all the electronic health records into computable data. So I thank all the projects that fund our group, national and European, and also mostly my colleagues, Luis Gasco, Salva Lima, and Martin Kralinger. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you. Eulàlia will now join us for questions. As a reminder, if you're in the room, please use the microphone in the center aisle. So we have one.
Yeah, thanks for the presentation. And just one detail, you told us that you haven't found anything for osteosynthesis, but in SNOMED, this is called arthroplasty or arthroplastia in Spanish. And one way to find out is just look into other languages. For instance, the Belgian language in French, they have hundreds of concepts with the name osteosynthese. And so sometimes it's really a problem with translation or the meaning of maybe osteosynthesis is more the technique itself, and arthroplasty is the whole procedure. But I have a question also regarding to measure this difficulty, what you pointed out. So are you planning doing a study that determines inter-annotator agreement? Because I suppose that inter-annotator agreement would not be very high with these complicated cases.
Yeah, we usually do inter-annotator agreement, and we did for 500 mentions or so, but then, we had 14,000 and I ended up doing most of them. Yes, it couldn't be very high. We have always found that with complicated mentions. Yeah, this is right. And regarding the arthroplasty, yes, when we don't find the concept in our language, we always go not to other languages. We really go to the international edition in English. But what you are mentioning here is perhaps the need to have a specialist when concepts are difficult. Because for me, osteosynthesis is a concept and arthroplasty another. But maybe for a surgeon or traumatologist, they say me, okay, you can put that and it will be fine. And I don't have that certainty. When this happens also with the name of all the leukemias and lymphomas, you need a hematologist because they are very complicated. And this is one thing that we have found, that we don't have all the specialists at hand, and we have to do whatever we can. What we have realized, though, is that we are not that good at surgery, so we'll have to start working with surgeons to help us.
Thank you, Eulàlia. Is there any other question in the room? Well, we have a question over here. Eulàlia, which systems are you using to automatically normalize mentions?
We use a system that has been done by my colleague Luis Gasco, has done this system called Sign Linker, which has the mention and the label, so we know they are all procedures or symptoms or diseases. So we have that, and then it provides you with around 10 or 15 codes, approximate codes ranked. So the first should be closer to your mention than the second, etc. So we choose one, and we put if the code is narrow, so it's if the code is broader than our mention, or if it is exact, and then it saves that. And it's very quick for the codes that are more simple, not for the ones that are more complex, but it helps you get through these 80% very fast. I think there is a version on it in GitHub, but it's not the finished version yet. I think next year we'll have the finished version of this tool.
And there is another question. Can you use linguistics to better annotate and normalize mentions?
Yes. Yes, I think you should, because this is how, I guess, how deep learning and so they find patterns. So what we have found in our systems is that we train, for instance, if we look at procedures and we annotate manually 100 and we train systems, then it detects things that you had never annotated. And a lot of them is because of linguistic patterns, both in the mention and in the context. And I think it's the first thing we'll have to do with these complex mentions, is to analyze them linguistically and then do the other things. But first linguistically, because they have many things in common linguistically, all these complex mentions. We have a computational linguist in the group, so hopefully we'll be able to do it from now on.
Right. Thank you, Eulàlia. Is there any other question in the room? With that, we will conclude the session. Thank you, Eulàlia.
Thank you
Online
very much.
delegates can join another session through the event lobby. Thank you all.